Welcome all to our first inaugural talk from external speakers. It's a great pleasure for me to invite Emma Laing along, who's the Clinical Operations Manager with NHS Blood and Transplant. Emma's been working on this Pithia Trial, which is assessing donor kidneys prior to transplantation. And I'm going to say no more than hand over to her to give you an introduction to herself and the project and a bit about the work that's going on. Just remains for me to say that, you know, histopathology and out of hours is difficult, and when you're sat there at 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes you think, why am I doing this? And I think you'll find out, remember, that for the patient it's a really, really big thing. So any questions, can you put them in the chat, please, if that's okay? And again, just repeat, if you can turn your video link off while Emma's presenting, it would be really good. I'm going to hand over to you, Emma, and I will disappear as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Colin. And let me just bring up my slides for you all. So could someone just tell me, can you see those okay?
Yes.
Lovely, okay, thank you. So hi everyone, thank you all for joining. My name's Emma Laing, as Colin said. I'm a Clinical Operations Manager with NHS Blood and Transplant, so I'm based at the Clinical Trials Unit there. So I'm going to talk to you about the Pithia Trial today. But first of all, I thought it might be useful just to tell you a bit more about the team that I work in, the Clinical Trials Unit, before I then talk about the trial itself. So first of all, we're one of 53 clinical trials units in the UK. So we're a specialist unit with a kind of remit to help researchers set up clinical trials in the NHS. So we'll help them design the trial, actually conduct it, analyse the results, and then eventually publish those results as well. So clinical trials are all about finding out more and advancing the field of medicine. So within our team, we've got clinical operations staff like myself, we've got a data management team, we've got statisticians, and we've got a QA team, quality assurance. And we're actually based not only in Cambridge, but also in Bristol and Oxford. So NHS Blood and Transplant is a national organisation, and we're split between those 3 locations. So with clinical trials, the first step is really to get funding. So we help with grant applications, and then if we're successful in getting funding to do a trial, we'll then move into the setup phase. And after that, we move into the recruitment and data collection phase. And finally, we'll move to analyse the data and, as I say, publish the results. So within our team, we're working on lots of different projects. So our general portfolio is the big key areas are transfusion medicine trials and organ donation and transplantation trials. So it doesn't matter what these are, but these are just the projects that we've got on our books at the moment. So you can see which stage they're in. So we're really split between transfusion and organ donation. But today, obviously, we're going to talk about Pithia, and Addenbrook's pathology department are really one of the key sites in this trial. So it's really relevant to talk about. So you probably notice on the last slide, each trial tends to have an acronym. So Pithia stands for the pre-implantation trial of histopathology in renal allografts. So well, hopefully that will become clear as I talk what that really means. So I'll tell you a bit about the background, so why we needed to do this trial in the first place, a bit about the trial design and how it works, and then I'll just summarise. But please, as Colin said, feel free to put questions in the chat and feel free to ask questions to me at the end as well. So I'll explain all of these things as I go along, but in terms of just giving you a few key points now, Pithia is a UK-wide clinical trial where Addenbrook's, as I say, one of the key sites involved. We're specifically looking at kidneys from deceased organ donors who were aged over 60 years when they die. And through the trial, we're able to provide a national biopsy service, which helps transplant surgeons decide which kidneys are suitable for transplantation. And the trial is led by Gavin Pettigrew, who's one of the transplant surgeons at Addenbrooke's. So it was really his idea, and our team have really just helped him make it happen. So I'm presenting on behalf of the whole team. So background to the study, I'll talk through a few slides. So this slide shows the national waiting list. So this shows the number of patients that are waiting for a kidney from a deceased donor in the UK each year. So although the waiting list has really dropped over the last 10 years, there are still a large number of patients waiting for a transplant versus the number of patients that actually receive a transplant each year. So there's quite a big gap really between the number of patients that need a transplant and those who receive one. So there's been lots of research aiming to address that gap and reduce it. And Pithia projects. So in the UK, lots of people agree to donate their organs after they die, including their kidneys, but not all of those organs can eventually be used for transplantation. And one of the main factors that affects that is the donor age at the time of death. So as the donor age increases, as you can see on this graph, the proportion of kidneys that are used really decreases. So when the donor, for donors over the age of 60, the proportion of kidneys that are transplanted becomes quite low. And again, this slide pretty much shows the same thing. So specifically for donors aged over 60, the kidney utilisation rate, as we refer to it, is only 28%. So there's huge scope to increase that. This slide shows the waiting times across the UK, and I'll give you a few minutes to kind of take it in, but really what it shows is there's such variation between all the different transplant centres in the UK. So the median waiting time for a kidney transplant, and this is deceased donor transplants, you can have a kidney from a living donor as well, but the majority are from deceased donors. So the median waiting time is about 2 years. But as you can see, that varies so significantly throughout the country. So for example, at the West London Transplant Centre, which is Hammersmith Hospital, the waiting time is significantly more than down here on the left, places like Cambridge and Leeds. And the main reason for that is the decision on whether to transplant a kidney is very clinician dependent. So there's no magic formula for them to decide which kidneys are okay and which aren't. So some clinicians are much more risk averse than others. And one thing that really stood out to the team that set up the Pithia trial and thought of the idea is that at Cambridge, the waiting time is significantly shorter. And one of the reasons for that is actually because of you guys in the pathology department. So the team had started being able to take routine biopsies from kidneys from older donors. And that obviously involves having 24-hour histopathology availability, which is not an easy thing to have access to. But they found a huge benefit to that. It reduced the waiting times for patients on their transplant list because it increased the number of kidney transplants that they could actually do. So doing a biopsy just gave them that extra information about the kidney itself and gave them that extra confidence of which to transplant, if that makes sense. So that's where the idea came from, and that's where the Pithia trial started. So that's Gavin that I mentioned earlier. So it was really his idea. So if this biopsy service works for Cambridge, the idea was to offer it out on a national scale, offer it to all the transplant centres and see if it would increase the numbers in the UK of kidney transplants. So as I say, 24-hour histopathology is not something that every transplant centre has access to, but we've managed to provide it through this trial. So transplant centres, once they have access to the Pithia trial service, they can choose to request a biopsy, which will help them to not only look at, the donor age and the donor medical history, but also take a biopsy and look at the actual quality of the kidney that they're being offered for their patient. And as I say, we're specifically focused on the kidneys from donors aged over 60, because we know that the utilisation in that group is quite low. So it's UK-wide. There are 23 hospitals in the UK that actually perform kidney transplants, so they're listed on here. But the organ donors could actually be anywhere in the UK, any hospital in the UK. So we've also got 6 labs set up to process the biopsies. So we've got really good coverage of the UK, and as you can see, Cambridge are one of the key cities. So when the donor pops up anywhere in the UK, the biopsy is taken and sent to one of these 6 labs. So I'll go into a bit more detail now about how the trial actually works, and some of you on the call may be involved and may have processed these biopsies, so may know even more than me. But just to say, we have a team within NHS Blood and Transplant called the Hub Update all of the national waiting lists. So when an organ donor pops up, they will allocate the organs to the correct person on each of the organ waiting lists. And they also mobilise teams, they organise the transport for the organs and the biopsies and everything. So this is kind of a step-by-step, just showing you the process. Centre, when they're offered a kidney, biopsy. Then, oh, can you hear me okay? I've had a notice about my internet connection.
And hear you now, Emma. You just had a little break there when you first on the beginning of this slide.
All right. Hopefully I'm back. But so the next step is for the biopsy to be taken, and we have organ.
Yeah, you're breaking up again a bit, Emma. Sorry. That's okay. I might just stop my video for a second, and hopefully that will help. But just shout if there's any more problems. Okay, so as I was saying, the biopsy is taken by the National Organ Retrieval Service. So we have 10 teams that operate in the UK. So the biopsies that we're using are punch biopsies. So they are 4mm punch biopsies, and they're taken from the kidney after it's been removed from the body, as shown in this picture. So the punch biopsy tool is just pushed into the tissue, and it gives a really good sample that can be analysed. So the next step is for that biopsy to be processed. So for example, one of the labs that it could come to is you here in Cambridge. So the biopsy is placed in formalin, it's packaged up, and it reaches the lab. It's processed in the usual way as an urgent biopsy. And then we're also using digital pathology to scan the images of these biopsies so that they can be remotely reviewed by a pathologist. So when the images are scanned, the pathologists get a really good image of the kidney. So instead of using a microscope, they'll go in and look on here, but they can zoom in and move the image just as they would with a microscope. So the next step is for the histopathologist to review the case and complete a report. I just wanted to say this is not a CUH pathologist, it's not even a pathologist, you'll be very pleased to hear. So what we're doing is actually using the Remotsy scoring system. So each biopsy is reviewed in the same way for the trial. So this score is very technical, I won't go into the details,
but it looks at 4 different components of the kidney, and it gives an overall score of between 0 and 12. And this gives the surgeon an idea of the kind of extent of the damage to the kidney in that donor. So if the score is between 0 and 4, it would indicate that the kidney's very high quality, and that kidney could be very suitable for transplantation on its own. But if the score is between 5 and 6, what we would recommend is taking both kidneys from the donor and transplanting them into the one recipient, and that's called a dual transplant. And that sometimes helps with the kidney function that you achieve after the transplant. And if the score is 7 or above, it really indicates that there's been a lot of damage, to that kidney, a lot of scarring, and it might not be a suitable kidney for transplantation. So again, this Pithia biopsy is really to try and give the transplant surgeon a bit more information about the kidney itself before they decide whether or not to transplant. And that's the final step in terms of sending that report to the transplant centre to help them make their decision. So I've given you kind of an overview of the process. So in summary, the main aim of the trial is to see whether having a service like this will increase the number of kidney transplants that are performed in the UK. And we won't really know the answer to that until we've concluded the trial and analysed the results. And the biopsy service will be available until the end of January next year, so we haven't got long left. As I say, Addenbrooke's is one of the 6 laboratories who are processing Pithia biopsies, really key to the trial's success. This trial is also the first national digital pathology service of its kind. So a team of biomedical scientists actually put this poster together and submitted it to the Biomedical Science Conference in 2019, and they were awarded the prize in their category. So that was a real good achievement. And this is one of the biomedical scientists from the Royal Free that helped put that poster together. And then finally, I just wanted to finish by saying a massive thank you to everybody at Addenbrooke's that's been involved in this. I know that coming in the middle of the night to process a biopsy is tough, it's hard work, but this trial has a real potential to make a difference to patients' lives. So thank you all, and I am more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Emma. We haven't got anything in the chat room at the moment, but if anybody has any questions, just shout or put them in the chat room, please. Don't be shy.
No, don't be shy. And sorry about my internet connection.
That's all right.
It always happens at the perfect moment, doesn't it?
Yeah. I've just got one question, Emma. What, in terms of the lockdown, what difference did it make to this trial? Because it must have been right in the middle of it, really. It was. COVID hit at the worst possible time for the Pithia trial. So we were right in the middle of the trial. We unfortunately had to stop the trial, put everything on pause, because in the UK, actually, there were barely any organ donation retrievals happening. So we stopped the trial between March 2020 and we only just restarted in July of this year. And since then, the numbers have been a lot smaller. So we're hoping that things will start to pick up. Winola sent an interesting question, which I think I know the answer to, but I'll let you answer it. One of the graphs showed the difference in numbers of donors and actual transplants. There was quite a large difference in numbers within the age category of 60 plus and a small difference in younger age categories. So why do donation trials focus on the 60 plus age category?
So yeah, the Pithia trial is focused on the older donor age category because generally they're the donors that transplant surgeons find it much harder to decide whether they should transplant the kidneys from or not. And as I said, there's in that group of patients, only 28% of kidneys are used for transplantation. So there's quite a big scope to make a difference there. Hopefully that answers the question. I'm just rereading it to check.
I think so. Winola, say yes if that does answer your question. Thank you.
But there are lots of trials going on. Not obviously we're not involved in all of them, but there's, you know, focusing on lots of different areas. Yeah.
So those of us who've been around a long time with renal transplantation, I don't know if you know that the first renal transplant in Cambridge took place in 1965 with Professor Sir Roy Khan. If you go up near the unit on level 3 or 4, I can't remember, you'll see a whole host of displays up there about it, and it's really is quite interesting. If I go back to my time in this, the typical donor that you used to get was somebody who'd been killed in a road accident, quite honestly, or was in brain death or something. Very often those are young people, because motorbikes and things and no crash helmets was sadly a great source of donor material. As time's gone on, the number of donors that are younger is just not there. And I'm afraid kidneys, like everything else when you age, pack in as they go on, and there's no easy way of telling it. So, you know, if I'm looking at GFR or something, glomerular filtration rate as an index, I can have a perfectly normal glomerular filtration rate, yet my kidneys might not be capable of doing anything once they're transplanted into somebody else's. I hope that sort of answers some of that question. It's a very different pool from when I was younger, and, you know, it was blue lighters from Edinburgh to Cambridge to bring a kidney down.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because the kind of average age of donors is just creeping up and up as people are living longer. So it becomes more and more important now to know, how do we accurately decide which organs can be used? And there is no magic answer, but having a biopsy hopefully will, you know, help them. And we've had lots of anecdotal feedback that it is useful. Lots of transplant centres have been using this service a lot now.
And I don't know how many of you know anybody on dialysis. I'm sure you do, because there are quite a lot of people on it. It's not the most pleasant of treatments, and it certainly lowers your age, your life expectancy significantly the longer you're on the list. And if any of you done any immunology, you'll see that lots of repeated transfusions and everything else cause lots of immune responses. Therefore, the chance of success as you're on the waiting list goes down and down and down. So, and lots of people who are on that waiting list, alas, the figures don't show it, actually die before they get anywhere near a transplant. I think it's really difficult for you at 3 o'clock in the morning doing this, but as long as you understand what it means to those individuals, and it means an awful lot. Are there any other questions? Anybody?
There's one that's just popped up in the chat.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
that's from Winola.
Yeah.
So yeah, Winola's asked, another challenge I can imagine with older donors is how long the transplants can be used for, and does the Rameauxy scoring help to assess that? So the Rameauxy scoring, yeah, is a good question. So the Rameauxy scoring is quite a generic scoring system, but it does give a good indication of, you know, how much chronic damage that kidney has incurred over its lifetime. But what tends to happen with the transplants and the national waiting list is organs are matched to the most appropriate recipient. So what that means is that organs from older donors tend to get matched to older recipients and offered to older recipients, because you're absolutely right, you need to match how long that transplant's going to last versus how long the person is going to live for. So the national waiting list accounts for that, which means that older recipients on the list are more likely to get offered kidneys from older donors, and the Rameauxy score is to try and help pick out the good ones, really, from all kidneys that are available. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you so much.
That's okay. The follow-up bit, because you said, and does Pithia Trial assess this too? So we'll be collecting lots of data through the trial and looking at lots of different outcome measures, but the main outcome measure is the number of transplants that are performed in the UK. So we're going to compare that before the biopsy service was available to afterwards.
I don't know how far it goes, Emma, but this would be obviously be a longitudinal study to make that assumption. So what's the follow-up on these patients? Are you just on, that's the number of transplants and that's it, or is there a long-term follow-up on them?
So within the trial, we're doing a year's follow-up.
Yeah.
So we'll check that the kidney's still functioning at 1 year post-transplant, but the kidney organ recipients are actually followed up on an annual basis for at least 10 years through NHSBT.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll be looking at some longer term follow-up data when it's available as well.
I mean, the nitty-gritty is that after 12 months, if it's successful, the prognosis is very, very good. And by successful, I mean fully successful and fully clearing creatinine and urine, not just...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anybody else got any questions? No? Very shy. Okay, Emma, it just remains for me to thank you ever so much for a great talk. And I hope it helps some people when they're doing this to understand how much it means to our patients, not just in Cambridge, but nationally as well. So thank you ever so much. Really, really grateful.
Thank you
very much. And thank you all.
and
thank you all for listening. Thank you all.
Thanks, Colin, and feel free to get in touch if you do have any other questions.
I will indeed. I may be coming back for other things as well. Now I've seen the list of trials that you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
Many thanks to you all, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Next one will be in November, and Namu and I will be in touch.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Emma.
Bye-bye.
Bye.